The coffee was halfway to his lips when he saw it, a constellation of dark purple blooming on her wrist, a macabre bracelet peeking from beneath the starched diner uniform. She was quick to hide it, a flicker of panic in her eyes as she glanced his way, a movement so practiced it spoke of countless repetitions. Samuel hadn't been looking for a damsel in distress, just a quiet Tuesday morning at the Sunrise Diner, a ritual he'd adopted since his business had spread into the gritty heart of Newark. But Alice, the waitress whose name tag felt more like a brand, moved with the cautious grace of someone perpetually bracing for impact. Outside, the city was a symphony of dawn, streetlights fading against the encroaching blue, the hurried footsteps of early risers echoing on the wet pavement. Samuel watched her reflection in the window, a subtle flinch when the cook's voice boomed, a smile that never quite reached her weary eyes. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice a hushed melody, the pot trembling slightly in her delicate hands. He noticed the hastily applied makeup, a desperate attempt to mask the yellowing bruise blossoming near her temple. He noticed, too, the way she seemed to cradle her ribs, as if each breath was a subtle act of defiance. At 6:02 a.m., a discordant note shattered the diner's fragile peace, the jingling of the door, the arrival of a man in a security guard uniform. His gaze locked on Alice, a possessive hunger burning in his eyes, a silent claim that sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. The change in Alice was instantaneous, a wilting of her spirit. Her spine became rigid, her shoulders hunched, her eyes downcast. She transformed into prey, sensing the presence of a predator. "That's my girlfriend," the man announced, the possessiveness in his tone unnecessarily loud in the near-empty diner. He moved towards her, his arms snaking around her waist in a grip that looked cruelly tight. "Getting off at 6:30, babe. I'll be waiting outside," he said, his voice a saccharine sweetness laced with a dark undercurrent that made Samuel's jaw clench. After he left, Alice moved through the diner like a phantom, her earlier warmth replaced by a mechanical efficiency. When she brought his check, Samuel placed a $100 bill and his business card on the table, a simple message scrawled across the back. Asterisk, if you ever need help. Anytime. Asterisk, he watched her pick up the card, her fingers trembling, a flicker of confusion battling with fear in her eyes before she quickly pocketed it, glancing around as if terrified of being seen with it. As Samuel stepped out into the growing dawn, his phone was already pressed to his ear, his most trusted lieutenant on the other end. By 7:15 a.m., he knew the security guard's name. Bradley Walsh, age 26, with 2 prior domestic violence complaints, both mysteriously dropped. He sat in his car across the street, watching as Alice emerged, Bradley's arm possessively draped around her shoulders. "Follow them," Samuel instructed his driver, settling back against the leather seat as they maintained a discreet distance behind Bradley's battered sedan. A cold, familiar feeling settled in his chest, a protective rage he hadn't felt since his sister's funeral 15 years ago. 3 blocks later, Bradley's car pulled up to a dilapidated apartment complex, where he half-dragged Alice inside a ground-floor unit. Through the gap in the blinds, Samuel could see them arguing, Bradley's finger jabbing accusingly at her face as she backed away, her movements like those of a cornered animal. By 7:43 a.m., Samuel had seen enough. He instructed his driver to return to his downtown high-rise, his mind already calculating the precise steps needed to extract Alice from her gilded cage. Unlike most of his business decisions, this wasn't about profit margins or territorial expansion. This was profoundly, irrevocably personal. "Find everything on Bradley Walsh," Samuel instructed his team later that morning, his gaze fixed on the Newark skyline stretching before him. "Work schedule, bank accounts, criminal history, everything. And I want surveillance on that apartment 24/7, starting now." At his mahogany desk, Samuel opened his laptop, researching nearby women's shelters and legal resources for domestic violence victims. If Alice sought help on her own, he wanted to ensure a path was cleared. If not, he would carve one for her. "Boss, why this girl?" his lieutenant asked, concern etching lines on his face as he stood in the doorway of Samuel's office. She's not connected to any of our business interests, and getting involved in domestic situations can get messy. Fast. Samuel was silent for a moment, his eyes distant as painful memories surfaced. A vision of his sister too late, after years of ignoring the subtle signs, the whispered pleas for help he hadn't heard. Because 15 years ago, I failed someone I loved, he finally answered, his voice hardening with resolve. I won't make that mistake again. By nightfall, Samuel had positioned 2 of his most trusted men near Alice's apartment, with strict instructions to observe only, unless she was in immediate danger. He sat in his own car a block away, watching Bradley's shadow pace restlessly behind the blinds, a predator confined to a cage of his own making. Through binoculars, Samuel could see Alice moving cautiously around the apartment, keeping furniture between herself and Bradley as she prepared dinner, a fragile dance of survival. Even at that distance, her fear was palpable, a heavy weight on her hunched shoulders, the way she startled at his sudden movements. At 9:17 p.m. Bradley left the apartment, stumbling slightly as he headed towards a nearby bar. Samuel's men confirmed that he'd been drinking heavily, his anger visibly building throughout the evening as he'd shouted at Alice repeatedly, though no physical violence had yet occurred. With Bradley gone, Samuel approached the apartment, his knock gentle but insistent. When Alice opened the door, the chain still in place, her eyes widened in recognition, darting nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting to see Bradley returning. I'm not here to hurt you, Samuel said softly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. I just wanted to make sure you're all right, and to let you know my offer of help is genuine whenever you're ready. Alice's fingers trembled on the door chain, indecision and fear warring in her eyes. He'll be back soon, she whispered, her voice barely audible. If he sees you here, he'll assume. He'll think I'm... She trailed off, unable to voice her deepest fears. I understand, Samuel replied, sliding a burner phone through the narrow opening. My number is programmed into one button. That's all you need to press day or night. My people are nearby and will reach you within minutes. The revelation that she was being watched sent a flash of panic across Alice's face, quickly followed by something that looked almost like hope, a fragile bud pushing through the hardened soil of despair. Why would someone like you care what happens to me? She asked, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Because I've seen this story before, and I couldn't change the ending then, Samuel answered honestly, the rare admission feeling like gravel in his throat. But I can now if you'll let me. As he walked away, Samuel heard the soft click of multiple locks engaging behind him, a desperate attempt to create a sanctuary. He knew she would hide the phone somewhere Bradley wouldn't find it. Whether she would ever use it remained to be seen, but he had opened a door for her, a sliver of light in the oppressive darkness. For the next 3 days, Samuel's surveillance team reported Bradley's increasing volatility. He'd lost his job for showing up drunk, had maxed out Alice's credit card on gambling debts, and the shouting from their apartment had neighbors threatening to call the police. A chorus of discontent growing louder with each passing day. On the 4th night at 2:37 a.m., Samuel's phone rang with an alert from his team. Alice had finally left for work, and Bradley had followed, clearly intoxicated and growing more aggressive with each block, his shadow looming larger with each step. Samuel immediately directed his driver toward the diner. As Samuel's car turned the corner, he spotted them in the dimly lit parking lot behind the Sunrise Diner, a tableau of impending violence. Bradley had Alice pinned against the brick wall, one hand gripping her throat while the other pulled back in a fist, a brutal painting etched against the night. Samuel was moving before the car fully stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. Take your hands off her, Samuel ordered, his voice dangerously quiet as he stepped into the pool of yellow security light, a predator confronting another. Bradley spun around, momentarily shocked by the interruption before his alcohol-fueled bravado returned. Mind your own business, rich boy, Bradley slurred, keeping one hand on Alice's shoulder to prevent her escape. This is between me and my girlfriend, so why don't you get back in your fancy car and drive away? Samuel didn't flinch as Bradley approached him, attempting intimidation with his slightly taller frame. Alice became my business the moment you put your hands on her, he replied, glancing past Bradley to where Alice stood frozen, blood trickling from her split lip, a symbol of her silent suffering. With speed that belied his refined appearance, Samuel sidestepped Bradley's clumsy punch, using the man's momentum to slam him face-first into the brick wall, a sudden and decisive act. I don't typically handle problems personally anymore, Samuel murmured near Bradley's ear as he held him immobile, his voice a low growl. But I made an exception for you. Samuel's security team materialized from the shadows, efficiently restraining Bradley despite his drunken struggles, a well-rehearsed choreography of intervention. Take him somewhere private, Samuel instructed them, his tone making it clear this wasn't their first such encounter. Explain the new rules very carefully. Alice stood trembling against the wall, her wide eyes fixed on Samuel as she struggled to process what was happening. The sudden shift from victim to rescued too surreal to comprehend. Who are you, really? She asked, her voice barely audible as Samuel's men disappeared with a cursing Bradley. Someone who recognizes the look in your eyes? Samuel answered gently, maintaining a respectful distance as he offered her his handkerchief for her bleeding lip, a gesture of unexpected kindness. My car is waiting to take you somewhere safe if you'll allow it. Alice hesitated, years of fear and distrust warring with a desperate hope for escape. A silent battle waged on her face. He'll come after me? She whispered, glancing nervously in the direction they'd taken Bradley. He always finds me. Not anymore, Samuel promised, the certainty in his voice finally breaking through her hesitation. Bradley Walsh won't come near you again unless you want him to. That's not a threat. It's a guarantee of your freedom. Dawn was breaking as Samuel's car pulled up to a modern apartment building in an upscale neighborhood across town. A stark contrast to the dilapidated complex Alice had called home. This belongs to one of my businesses, he explained as they rode the elevator to the 12th floor. You can stay as long as you need, no strings attached. The apartment was spacious and impersonal, clearly a corporate property rather than someone's home, a temporary haven. My assistant stocked the basics, Samuel said, showing Alice the kitchen and bathroom. A doctor will come to check your injuries, but only with your permission, no pressure. Alice moved cautiously through the space, trailing her fingers over the expensive furniture as if afraid to fully touch anything, the fear of something so luxurious being taken away almost palpable. Why would you do all this for a waitress you barely know? She asked, turning to face him with wary confusion. Because 15 years ago, I watched my sister endure what you've been enduring, Samuel answered, the painful admission tasting like ash in his mouth, a burden he carried always. By the time I convinced her to leave, it was too late. Her boyfriend couldn't handle losing control. She paid the price for my hesitation. Understanding dawned in Alice's eyes, followed by the first genuine softening of her expression he'd seen, a flicker of recognition of shared pain. I'm sorry about your sister, she said simply, holding his gaze without flinching for the first time, a moment of genuine connection. Rest now, Samuel replied, moving toward the door to give her space, understanding the need for solitude. There's security in the building and my number is on the counter. Whatever you decide to do next, I'll help make it happen. Whether that's pressing charges, relocating, or simply starting over. 2 days passed with Alice barely leaving the apartment, jumping at every unexpected sound and checking the locks compulsively, the trauma replaying on loop in her mind. Samuel had respected her space, only sending text messages to ensure she had everything she needed, while his security team maintained a discreet presence, a silent shield. On the third morning, Alice received a notification that Bradley had emptied their joint bank account and reported her car stolen. Though it was legally registered in her name, a final act of calculated malice. The insidious nature of these actions, clearly designed to force her return, cracked something in her fragile composure. He's trying to make sure I can't survive without him, she told Samuel when he arrived after her panicked call, her voice hollow as she showed him the bank statement. This was my savings from double shifts for 3 years. Everything I had. Samuel made a single phone call, arranging for a lawyer specializing in domestic abuse cases to meet with them that afternoon, a swift and decisive move. Financial control is another form of abuse, he explained gently, watching as Alice paced the living room. But it's also the easiest to counter with the right resources. By evening, Alice had temporary restraining orders filed against Bradley, a new bank account at Samuel's private bank, and the first installment of a personal safety grant from one of Samuel's foundations, a lifeline thrown into the darkness. The grant, typically awarded to domestic violence survivors, would allow her financial independence without feeling indebted to Samuel personally, preserving her dignity. At 11:43 p.m. As Samuel was reviewing business contracts in his home office, his security team alerted him that Bradley had been spotted outside Alice's apartment building, clearly intoxicated and attempting to bribe the doorman for access. A desperate act of defiance. Samuel was in his car within minutes. The rain fell in sheets as Samuel arrived, finding Bradley being physically restrained by his security team in the building's underground parking garage. A scene of controlled chaos. "I know she's here," Bradley was shouting, struggling against the men holding him. "Tell your boss I want my property back." Samuel stepped from the shadows, adjusting his cuffs with a deliberate calm that belied the cold fury in his eyes, a practiced mask of control. "She was never your property, Mr. Walsh," he stated, his voice carrying easily despite its quiet tone. "That misconception is the root of your current troubles." Bradley's bloodshot eyes widened with recognition, quickly narrowing with hatred as he renewed his struggles. A trapped animal. "You think you can just take her? She'll come crawling back. She always does. She's nothing without me, and she knows it." "That's where you're fundamentally incorrect," Samuel replied, nodding to his men, who tightened their grip as Bradley lunged forward. The charade of control shattered. "Alice is discovering her worth now that you're not diminishing it daily. She's already more than you could comprehend." Samuel pulled out his phone, playing the audio recording his team had captured of Bradley's threats in the parking lot and his admission of prior abuse, a damning indictment. "The restraining order Alice filed this morning means your presence here is a criminal violation. The police have been called." As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each second, the sound of justice arriving. "Your previous victims dropped charges because you terrorized them," Samuel said, stepping closer to Bradley's restrained form, his voice filled with quiet authority. "Alice won't be intimidated because she isn't alone anymore." 2 police cruisers pulled into the garage, officers emerging with hands on their weapons until they assessed the controlled situation. Samuel's lawyer appeared as if from nowhere, presenting the restraining order documentation as Bradley was handcuffed, still spewing threats, a pathetic display of fading power. He violated a restraining order, attempted to break into a private residence, and made death threats that were recorded. The lawyer informed the officer smoothly, handing over the audio file, ensuring swift and decisive action. "My client wishes to press charges to the fullest extent of the law." Samuel watched him passively as Bradley was placed in the back of a police car, the man's rage dissolving into pathetic begging when he realized the seriousness of his situation, a final unraveling. Only after the police had departed did Samuel allow himself to exhale, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, the weight of responsibility shifting. Alice waited in her apartment, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white as Samuel explained what had happened, carefully choosing his words. "He's in custody, but he'll likely make bail by morning," he told her honestly, watching her absorb this reality with newfound strength rather than panic, a resilience that surprised even him. "I want to testify against him," she said finally, surprising Samuel with her resolve, a newfound determination. "Not just for me but for the others who were too afraid. Someone should have stopped him years ago." She trailed off, unconsciously touching a faded scar near her collarbone, a physical reminder of her pain. Over the next week, Alice began reclaiming pieces of herself that had been systematically dismantled during her 2 years with Bradley, rebuilding her shattered identity. She cut her hair, a symbolic act of shedding the past, enrolled in an online course to finish her interrupted business degree, and began attending a support group for abuse survivors, finding solace and strength in shared experiences. Samuel kept his distance but remained available, understanding her need to establish independence without replacing one controller with another, a delicate balance. Their interactions shifted gradually from protector and protected to something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect rather than obligation, a budding connection. On a crisp autumn morning, Alice invited Samuel to meet her at a small cafe near the waterfront, away from both the diner's painful memories and the apartment's safe isolation. A deliberate choice. She was waiting outside when he arrived, her shoulders straight and her eyes clear in a way he'd never seen before. A transformation both subtle and profound. "I've been offered a job at the women's shelter," she announced as they settled at a corner table, pride evident in her voice. A genuine sense of purpose. "They need someone to coordinate resources for residents, housing, legal support, job placement. The director said my experience makes me uniquely qualified." Samuel smiled genuinely, recognizing this milestone for what it was. Alice turning her trauma into purpose, a powerful act of healing and hope. "They couldn't find anyone better?" he replied, meaning every word, his voice filled with admiration. "Those women will trust you because you truly understand their journey." As they shared breakfast, Alice revealed more about her past. How she'd come to Newark with dreams of finishing college. How Bradley's charm had morphed into control so gradually, she hadn't recognized the danger until she was isolated from friends and family. A slow and insidious erosion of her spirit. Samuel listened without judgment, offering only support, creating a safe space for her vulnerability. "What about you?" Alice asked finally, studying him with new confidence in her gaze, a spark of curiosity. Everyone knows Samuel Dennedy, the businessman, but few seem to know the man. "Do you ever let anyone see behind that carefully constructed facade?" The question caught Samuel off guard, accustomed as he was to maintaining professional distance in all relationships, a shield against emotional vulnerability. "Not often," he admitted after a thoughtful pause, his brow furrowed. "In my world, vulnerability is usually weaponized against you at the first opportunity." As weeks passed, their meetings became a regular occurrence. Coffee on Wednesdays, occasional dinners where they discussed everything from books to business strategies, a gradual opening of their guarded hearts. Alice flourished at the women's shelter, her natural empathy complemented by the organizational skills she developed during her business courses. A perfect blend of compassion and competence. Samuel found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone. About growing up in a family where power was the only currency that mattered. About his sister's vibrant spirit before an abusive relationship dimmed it forever, lifting a corner of the veil. With Alice, the carefully maintained walls he'd built around himself began to show hairline cracks. A slow and tentative thaw. By December, Alice had saved enough to rent her own small apartment, insisting on independence despite Samuel's offers of continued support, a symbol of her growing strength. "I need to stand on my own," she explained as he helped her move in. Her few possessions dwarfed by the empty space, a desire for self-sufficiency. "But that doesn't mean I want to stand alone." The statement hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning that neither was quite ready to address. A silent acknowledgement of the connection forming between them. Samuel merely nodded, understanding that true healing couldn't be rushed, and that whatever was developing between them deserved the foundation of complete recovery. A patient and respectful approach. Alice's court date against Bradley approached, bringing renewed tension as she prepared to face him again. A final confrontation with her past. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," she told Samuel during a late-night phone call, her voice steady despite the audible strain, a testament to her progress. "I'm afraid of the person I was with him, so diminished, so lost." The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear, a fitting backdrop for the emotional trial ahead. Alice dressed in a professional navy suit that reflected her transformation from victim to advocate, projecting confidence and strength. Samuel waited respectfully in the courthouse hallway, present for support but careful not to overshadow her moment of reclaiming power, a quiet ally. Bradley arrived, flanked by an expensive defense attorney, a clear signal of outside support. His appearance was polished, in stark contrast to his previous dishevelment, clearly attempting to present himself as a respectable citizen wrongfully accused. A calculated deception. His eyes burned with hatred when they locked on Alice, quickly masked when he noticed observers. A fleeting glimpse of the darkness within. "He has a new lawyer," Samuel murmured to his own attorney, recognizing the defender as someone typically retained by a local corrupt politician. A troubling development. Bradley doesn't have that kind of money. Someone's backing him. Inside the courtroom, Bradley's strategy became clear as his lawyer portrayed Alice as mentally unstable, claiming she'd fabricated abuse allegations after becoming obsessed with wealthy businessman Samuel Dennedy. A classic smear campaign. The character assassination was delivered with practiced precision, designed to create reasonable doubt and undermine her credibility. M.S. Reynolds has a history of making these exact accusations, Bradley's attorney claimed, producing statements from previous girlfriends recanting their domestic violence claims. A coordinated effort to discredit her. She saw an opportunity to attach herself to Mr. Dennedy's fortune and reputation, manipulating his well-known charitable sympathies. Samuel watched Alice's hands tremble slightly before she clasped them tightly in her lap, her expression remaining composed despite the vicious attack on her character and integrity. A stoic display of resilience. Her quiet dignity in the face of such calculated cruelty only deepened his respect for her. When Alice finally took the stand, she spoke with clear-eyed conviction, presenting medical records documenting injuries over months, bank statements showing financial control, and text messages revealing Bradley's psychological manipulation. A mountain of irrefutable evidence. Her voice never wavered, even when describing the worst abuses, her honesty radiating through the room. "The defense would have you believe I manufactured evidence to attract a wealthy man's attention," Alice concluded, looking directly at the judge rather than at Bradley. "But these hospital visits predated any interaction with Mr. Dennedy by over a year. The pattern was established long before he entered the picture." During cross-examination, Bradley's lawyer attempted to provoke emotional reactions, implying Alice had been involved with Samuel while still living with Bradley, a blatant attempt to smear her character. "Is it not true that you saw an escape route in Mr. Dennedy and fabricated or exaggerated claims to gain his sympathy and financial support?" "No," Alice replied simply, refusing to be baited into defensive explanations. "Mr. Dennedy offered help because he recognized abuse that others chose to ignore. My only regret is not finding the courage to leave sooner." At lunch recess, Samuel received an urgent call from his security team, a crucial piece of the puzzle falling into place. Bradley had connections to City Councilman Philip Hargrove, who was currently under federal investigation for corruption. Records showed Bradley had worked security for Hargrove's campaigns and possessed potentially damaging information about ballot tampering. A web of deceit. "They're protecting each other, Samuel," his lieutenant said, the pieces falling into place as he shared the information with his attorney. "Hargrove's funding the defense in exchange for Bradley's silence about election fraud. That's why they're attacking so aggressively. They need to discredit Alice completely." When court reconvened, Bradley took the stand, presenting himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend and her wealthy new benefactor. A masterful performance. His appearance was compelling, his voice breaking at appropriate moments, expressing confusion and heartbreak over Alice's sudden accusations. A calculated act of manipulation. "I only wanted to help her," Bradley claimed, his eyes downcast in practiced remorse. "She struggled with anxiety and jealousy, often accusing me of things I never did. The bruises came from an incident where I had to restrain her during a panic attack to prevent her from harming herself." A complete fabrication. Samuel felt Alice stiffen beside him at the blatant lie, her breathing becoming shallow as Bradley systematically rewrote their history, painting himself as a concerned boyfriend overwhelmed by Alice's fabricated mental health issues, a cruel and calculated distortion of the truth. The character assassination was as violent as any physical abuse. During a brief recess, Samuel stepped into the hallway, making a call to his most trusted investigator. A swift and decisive move. "I need everything on Councilman Hargrove and Bradley Walsh's connection. Phone records, meetings, financial transactions, everything. If they're coordinating, there will be evidence." "We have a problem, Samuel," His attorney informed him when he returned to the courtroom, the tension in the air palpable. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a symphony of whispers dancing through the courtroom. Had justice, that blindfolded goddess, peeked beneath her veil to favor one side? The whispers hinted at an unholy alliance, a judge and a defense attorney bound by more than just professional courtesy. But Samuel watched only Alice, her face a canvas of dawning realization, the terrifying understanding that the very system she trusted might betray her. In that moment, a dormant fire ignited within him, a protective fury that threatened to consume the carefully constructed life he had built, the shadows he had desperately tried to outrun. It began at 4:52 p.m. with a single text message, a digital whisper that shattered the fragile peace. Recordings found Bradley was blackmailing Hargrove over ballot tampering. Hargrove was paying Bradley's legal fees through a shell company. The judge was receiving donations to his re-election campaign from the same shell. He needed to pause the proceedings immediately. The words were like shards of glass, cutting through the facade of normalcy. Samuel, his voice barely a breath, relayed the message to Alice's attorney. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. He said it was a web of election fraud, blackmail, and judicial corruption that reached the highest echelons of power. The FBI needed to be involved. Within hours, Samuel found himself in a clandestine meeting with a federal prosecutor, a woman who had been quietly investigating Hargrove for months. He offered her irrefutable evidence, the recordings that held the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. But he demanded a guarantee for Alice Reynolds' protection and complete immunity from prosecution. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of hope and trepidation. As Samuel returned to his penthouse, weary but resolute, the prosecutor had recognized the gravity of the evidence, the undeniable link between Bradley's abuse and Hargrove's fraudulent victory. The next morning, federal agents descended upon Bradley's opulent apartment, Hargrove's sprawling office, and the judge's lavish chambers. The domestic violence case was temporarily suspended, overshadowed by allegations of judicial misconduct, but Alice's restraining order remained in place, a small beacon of victory amidst the storm. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Alice observed, her voice laced with worry as Samuel recounted the night's tumultuous events. "These are powerful men who won't hesitate to retaliate if they suspect your involvement." "I've faced worse," Samuel replied, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. He knew the truth was far more complex, more perilous. The difference, he said, was that Bradley and Hargrove built their empire on fear and intimidation. Real power came from having nothing left to lose. For 2 weeks, the local news was consumed by the scandal, each day bringing shocking revelations about Hargrove's criminal network. Bradley's role shifted from abuser to potential witness as prosecutors offered him a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. "He'll take it," Alice predicted with unwavering certainty. "He's always protected his own interests above all else. He'll betray anyone to save himself." She was right. Bradley cooperated fully, providing incriminating details of Hargrove's scheme in exchange for a reduced sentence. The domestic violence case, however, would proceed separately. The FBI insisted on it after reviewing Alice's compelling evidence. With the original judge recused, Alice's case was reassigned to a respected female judge known for her commitment to justice. Samuel maintained a respectful distance, ensuring Alice had the resources and support she needed, allowing her to tell her own story. "This is your victory, Alice," he reminded her. "Never forget that." On a crisp January morning, Alice walked confidently into the courtroom, no longer the frightened woman hiding her bruises. Bradley sat at the defense table, diminished and alone, stripped of his power. The proceedings moved swiftly. The judge discredited Bradley's testimony, and his own cell phone revealed secret videos of Alice, twisted trophies of his violence that sealed his fate. The judge sentenced Bradley to custody pending sentencing, her voice firm. Domestic violence would be treated with the seriousness it deserved. Emerging from the courthouse, reporters swarmed Alice, microphones thrust forward. "I am just one of countless women who have faced abuse and a flawed system," she stated calmly. "What's next?" a reporter asked. Alice paused, considering the question with thoughtful introspection. "Helping others find the support that I eventually found," she replied, her eyes meeting Samuel's in the crowd. In the weeks that followed, Alice's case became a catalyst for reform. The state attorney general launched a review of dismissed domestic violence cases linked to Hargrove's network. 3 former victims came forward, their cases reopened. By springtime, Alice was promoted to assistant director at the women's shelter, implementing innovative programs that combined safety with education and career development. Samuel supported these initiatives through his foundation, providing funding and connecting Alice with business leaders who offered employment opportunities for survivors. Their collaboration strengthened their personal connection, built on respect and admiration. On a warm evening in May, Samuel invited Alice to dinner at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the river. "I have a business proposition for you," he said. "A vacant commercial property on Monroe Street for your transitional housing project." Alice studied him with her clear-eyed assessment. "Is this a business proposition, or is it a personal one?" she asked. "Both," Samuel admitted. "The property makes perfect business sense, but I would be lying if I claimed my interest was purely professional." Alice smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I've been waiting for you to acknowledge that," she said. "I needed to find myself before considering finding someone else." "And have you?" Samuel asked anxiously. "Found yourself?" Alice reached across the table and gently placed her fingers over his. "I have," she confirmed, her voice filled with strength. "Enough to know what I want and what I don't want, without fear clouding my judgment." Their relationship evolved naturally, neither rushing nor avoiding the undeniable connection between them. Samuel revealed his true self, the businessman and the hidden shadows of his past. Alice shared her dreams for the future she was building from the ashes of her trauma. On a stormy September night, exactly 1 year after Alice first called for help, Samuel's security team reported that Bradley had been unexpectedly released on parole, his sentence inexplicably reduced. "He's been asking questions about you," Samuel informed Alice urgently. "He's fixated on the idea that you're the reason his arrangement with Hargrove fell apart. He blames you for everything he's lost." Within hours, Samuel increased security at Alice's apartment and the women's shelter, installing surveillance cameras and assigning plainclothes security guards. The measures were discreet yet comprehensive, forming an impenetrable shield against Bradley's rage. 3 days passed without incident, the constant waiting creating an undercurrent of tension. Alice refused to hide or alter her routine. "I won't allow him to make me a prisoner again," she explained. At 7:13 p.m. on a Friday evening, Alice was working late at the shelter when security cameras captured Bradley entering the building through a side door left ajar by a negligent maintenance worker. Samuel received the alert and abandoned a crucial business dinner mid-sentence. Bradley moved purposefully through the hallways with disturbing ease. He carried no visible weapon, but his movements exuded violent intention, his expression eerily flat. In her office, Alice was reviewing funding applications when the power went out. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows. Years of hypervigilance had honed her instincts, and now every fiber of her being screamed danger. She immediately pressed the silent alarm button. The shelter's security protocol activated, automatically locking doors to isolate sections of the building. Alice remained calm, retrieving the self-defense spray from her desk drawer as she heard footsteps approaching in the darkened hallway. "Did you honestly think I wouldn't find you?" Bradley's voice drifted menacingly through the door. "Your boyfriend's money can't protect you from what you've done to me. You took everything from me, Alice. Now I'm going to return the favor." Alice stood firmly behind her desk, her cell phone held securely in her hand, documenting Bradley's escalating threats. "You lost everything because of your own choices and actions," she responded, her voice steady. "Just like you taught me that there are always consequences for disobedience. Now you're finally facing the consequences for your own numerous crimes." The door handle rattled violently as Bradley attempted to force entry. "Always hiding behind locked doors now," he taunted. "The Alice I knew was far too weak and pathetic to stand alone. Without your rich protector, what are you really?" I'm the woman who survived you, Alice replied, strength replacing victimhood. I'm the woman who helped put you in prison, who has helped countless other women escape from men just like you. I'm the woman who rebuilt everything you tried to destroy. I don't need to hide anymore, Bradley. In the distance, sirens wailed as police responded to the alarm. The sound triggered a shift in Bradley's demeanor, transforming him from calculated to desperate. The pounding on the door intensified, the wood splintering under the assault of a fire extinguisher. Alice gripped her desk, memories flashing through her mind of the first time Bradley had broken down a door to get to her. This time, however, was different. She stood tall and resolute, her eyes fixed on the weakening door, her mind clear and focused on the self-defense techniques she had mastered. Through the shelter's security feed on her phone, Alice glimpsed Samuel arriving at the building, his features hardened with determination as he coordinated with the police. Their connection had grown from rescuer and victim into a true partnership that had helped them both heal their deepest wounds. "You should have stayed gone, Bradley," Alice called out, her voice unwavering. "Every single minute you spend attempting to control me again is going to add another year to your prison sentence. The police have everything recorded, and this time there's no corrupt councilman to come to your rescue." Just as the door began to give way, Samuel arrived at the shelter's rear entrance, having broken every speed limit in his desperate race to reach Alice. The security cameras showed him something the police couldn't yet see. Bradley had wedged the fire extinguisher in place to break down the door while simultaneously positioning himself to ambush the responding officers at the main entrance. He's creating a diversion, Samuel realized quickly, redirecting the police through his security team's radio link. He wants them focused on the front entrance while he makes his escape through the service exit, taking Alice with him. The calculated nature of the plan confirmed that this was no impulsive act of revenge, but a carefully orchestrated abduction attempt. Just as Bradley finally broke through Alice's office door, the emergency sprinkler system activated, triggered by Samuel's deliberate override of the building's security protocols. The sudden deluge disoriented Bradley long enough for Alice to deploy her self-defense spray, temporarily blinding him as she moved swiftly past him toward the exit. Bradley recovered quickly, lunging blindly and catching Alice's arm in a painfully familiar grip that instantly transported her back to years of brutal abuse. For one critical moment, old conditioning threatened to paralyze her with the remembered terror. Then something shifted deep within her, a final piece of healing clicking definitively into place. With precise movements honed from her self-defense training, Alice effortlessly broke Bradley's grip and created much-needed distance. She was no longer the helpless victim he had expected to find. "You have absolutely no power over me anymore," she stated clearly, backing steadily toward the exit as police officers swarmed into the hallway, their weapons drawn. As Bradley was handcuffed and led away, the charges against him now including breaking parole, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and violating a restraining order, Alice stood in the rain-soaked parking lot, watching with clear and unwavering eyes. Samuel approached cautiously, respecting her need for space in this momentous confrontation with her past. "It's really over?" Alice said softly as Bradley disappeared into the back of a police car, the statement hanging somewhere between a question and a profound realization. Not just the relationship or the horrific abuse, but the all-consuming fear that had defined her existence for so long. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No terror, no anger, not even pity, just nothing. Later that evening, in the quiet sanctuary of Samuel's penthouse, overlooking the glittering city lights, Alice rested her head gently against his shoulder, both of them still processing the day's dramatic and deeply emotional events. "When I first met you," she murmured, her fingers intertwined with his, "I honestly couldn't imagine ever feeling safe again. Now I finally understand that safety isn't about hiding away. It's about having the strength to face whatever frightens you." "You always possessed that strength, Alice," Samuel replied softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You just needed the time and space to remember it." In the comfortable silence that followed, both of them recognized the remarkable distance they had traveled. Alice, from a trapped and broken victim to a powerful advocate for change. Samuel, From a lonely protector burdened by his past to a true partner, finding solace and healing in connection. 2 weeks later, Bradley was sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge cited his calculated stalking and attempted abduction as irrefutable evidence of the ongoing danger he posed to Alice and potentially other women. The system that had once failed Alice so profoundly now delivered the long-overdue justice she deserved, definitively closing the final chapter of her traumatic past. At the grand opening of the Transitional Housing Center on Monroe Street, Alice stood confidently at the podium, her voice resonating clearly across the crowd of supporters, donors, and most importantly, the countless women who would directly benefit from the safe haven she had created from her own painful experience.